in the time that I was in the game, the Skaggs situation, obviously, the one silver lining in that is that the league stopped chasing guys down for marijuana, right? And prior to that, they were really being sticklers with guys and not allowing, people to have an outlet other than alcohol. And what we learned from a generation before us is that the alcohol just wasn't really productive in our lives. And you see a lot of guys, doing damage to themselves. If you look at the Jeremy Jami situation, if you talk about steroids, you talk about alcohol abuse, there's a lot of things like that can evolve in people's lives after the game, and having people say, I'd like to smoke a joint because I don't want to do these other things and I don't want to take some hardcore drugs. They weren't allowing guys to do that for such a long time. They were pushing people in a way to go find some other vice. And, a lot of times I personally don't blame any of that stuff on organizations at all or Major League Baseball. I mean, I think the power mover in that sense has always been the players. What happens inside of a locker room is dominated by the players. They're the ones that get the most respect. The guys that are working in there are just doing what they're told. And, it's just a sad situation that you see guys who have hurt their career, just spectacular athletes that have gone down a road, i.e. the Dwight Goodens of the world or the Darryl Strawberries who, they could have put up just much bigger numbers than they ever did, even though they were great players.
Yeah, no, you're right, man. Hearing Matt Harvey, who didn't want to talk, but did and chose not to, ask for to plead the fifth or whatever and talked and admit that cocaine probably played a role in him not quite reaching the potential. That was so heavy to read. But I mean, you mentioned Gooden. I'm sure you know lots of stories like that, contemporaries or guys. Yeah, I mean, you outlasted everybody, Bronson. So I'm sure that's more common than we care to admit.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, look, the average age of an athlete in his prime, is somewhere in his mid to late 20s. I mean, they give us a lot of freedom to travel around the country and have a good time, and people aren't checking on you at night. And you get into things that you enjoy. And there are a lot of guys who just sit and play the Xbox and watch movies and have quiet time, but there's a large percentage of guys as well that like to have a good time. And sometimes if you have a good time for too long and you start getting into some things, as Ken Caminiti did, right? And when you have a grown man who's making a lot of money, it's hard to tell people, don't do things. And so sometimes these guys get on a slippery slope and they just can't pull it back.
Talking to Bronson Arroyo here on the Parkins and Spiegel show. I haven't been able to stop thinking about a text that Tyler Skaggs sent to Harvey that he wanted, I think, a Percocet or whatever it was, so he could, quote, pitch loosey-goosey, unquote. And I'm thinking about, frankly, times in my life when I've been singing, Bronson. I was like, boy, it'd be nice to feel a little something some way, or whatever. It's like, anybody in any walk of life. And is that more common than we know that guys would pitch with an opiate or just like with that kind of buzz on?
Guys that I played with, they were usually looking for energy for the most part, right? We talked about the old greenies, which was a mild form of speed. You talk about, even a cup of coffee. You guys know how it is. If you know somebody who drinks coffee every day, you guys probably have coffee. There's something that feels disrupted in your life if you don't have that routine. And what winds up happening is people just, you put something in your system, and if you go out there and pitch on a little bit of a painkiller because your elbow's bothering you, and you have a good outing and the pain isn't there, there's something psychological that could also be a placebo that makes you believe that you actually are pitching better on that substance now. And sometimes you start doing that every fifth day, and next thing you know, you've been doing that for 3 or 4 years, and you don't realize how dependent you are on that. I have definitely played with guys, that I really want to name. They have retired from the game not long ago that were my contemporaries that were, coming out of the bullpen and taking, 5 and 6 Percocets just to get out there on the mound every single night, and then running the streets hard and doing cocaine at night. And, it's not survivable over the long haul. It's what made me who I was in the game, because I was a guy who loved to go out and have a good time, but I was drinking water most of the night. I might have a Corona or two, but I was never dependent upon stuff like that. It just wasn't in my personality. And, there's just really no way to stop it, because if you talk to some of these guys about the way they're living their life, for the most part, they feel like it's something that is actually making them a better athlete, not knowing that they're just slowly kind of decaying on the underside.
How often, like when there's the story comes out from the testimony, recreational drug use in the clubhouse, crushing up pills, snorting them on the bathroom stall, doing coke in the clubhouse, is that an outlier in your mind, or is that something that is also happening?
No, it's definitely an outlier. I mean, there are definitely things like that happening in the game, but it's not a mainstay. You're not seeing it every day. I would say, as time has gone on, when I came into the game, what I call kind of the steroid generation and the guys taking the greenies, that generation has left, and what those guys left for us was a lot of times a bit of baggage about being reckless, right? And they were also reckless with their money. Those guys tipped the clubhouse guys insanely, right? Like they'd ask for somebody to go down and pick up 10 hamburgers at McDonald's and bring them in, and they would maybe give the kid $500 and say, keep the change. In the clubhouse today, guys are the exact opposite. They pinch pennies more. They realize they need to take care of their families and stuff. They take care of their bodies better than we ever have. They understand nutrition better. There's more food in the clubhouse. So overall, in the game of baseball, health of the game is worlds better than it was in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s. But there's always going to be some outliers. And obviously, pills didn't exist back in those days, so people were doing more recreational drugs. Now it's a lot easier to just grab a couple things in a bottle that people don't have to go out and find, in the ghetto somewhere or on the street corner, and they can bring it in the clubhouse. And there are a few guys who might be dependent upon that, but it is not rampant in the locker room.
God, how similar is it to music when you're talking about a Bronson? A ton of musicians who got convinced that they were better on junk, right? And they weren't. They weren't, but they got convinced of it with that placebo effect you're talking about, just like for a pitcher.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I still got high school friends who tell me they played the greatest games of ping pong on acid in their lives. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm laughing. I'm like, bro, if we had a videotape of that, you guys wouldn't even want to see it. It'd be terrible, But in their mind, they were playing the greatest game of freaking ping pong in their lives.